Allies Amplified is a live series by IME Inc. that highlights powerful stories of LGBTQIA plus allies.
Not only are they sharing their stories, but also their journeys and insights to foster inclusivity, support, and most of all, friendship. And now it's time to turn it over to our host at the African Butterfly, Nyemade. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Allies Amplified. As she mentioned, I'm your host, Nyemade Boiwu. Thank you all so much for joining us. And let me also apologize in advance if I'm coughing or have to go on mute. I've been quite sick for the past week, so I'm still kind of taking it all in and trying to navigate doing life while being sick. But I'm so excited about my guest today. I have Coach Val, and we're going to be talking about the relationship between faith and being an ally. Um, as always, to begin these, I will start with some facts about faith and being and the LGBTQIA community. If you've been here for previous episodes, excuse me, you know that saying LGBTQIA plus becomes a little excessive over time. So I'll just refer to it as the community. So, fact number one, many faith traditions emphasize love and compassion. Across religious domination, core teachings often prioritize love, kindness, and justice. Allies within faith communities frequently draw on these principles to support LGBTQIA plus rights while remaining true to their identity. Two, affirming faith communities are growing. A growing number of religious organizations openly affirm and welcome members of the community, such as the United Church of Christ, Reformed Judaism, and many others. These communities advocate for inclusion while addressing the changes of reconciling tradition with modern understanding of sexuality and gender. Three, the intersectionality between faith and LGBTQIA identity. Many members of the community are also people of faith. For them, reconciling their spiritual identity with their sexuality or gender identity can be deeply personal. Allies who acknowledge and respect this intersection can provide critical support. Four, sacred texts are interpreted differently. Many debates about the community rights in religious contexts stem from varying interpretations of sacred texts. Allies and theologians in inclusive faith communities often argue that historical and cultural context must be considered to avoid discriminating against interpretations. Five, religious freedom and LGBTQIA rights often collide. In legal and social contexts, debates about religious freedom frequently intersect with community rights. Some groups advocate for the right to refuse services or recognition of LGBTQIA individuals based on religious beliefs, raising questions about discrimination and inequality. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, different types of faith. As I mentioned, I have my guest with me today, Coach Val. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, hello. I'm so glad that you for your invitations. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Before we begin, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
For sure, I would love to. So my name is Val Dupre, but my good friends and clients call me Coach Val. I am a resilience, life and resilience coach, as well as a shaman. Practice different spiritualities when it comes within the shamanism spectrum. So my work really involves not only helping people in the coaching, but I use spirituality and other ancient practice when I do my work. And I've been doing this for quite a few over decades. And just my story itself about faith will be interesting when we go into our conversations to understand it. And as an allied, also I had to go through a nice journey to understand and make peace with faith and religion and to become the ally that I am right now to all my other friends from the LGBTQIA community, the community, like you call it.
Well, I can't wait to hear more about your story, and thank you again so much for joining us. So let's just dive right in. You mentioned that you have an interesting story regarding your faith. Could you tell us more about like what your faith and what your spirituality is?
Yes, thank you so much. So I was like, I was born in the Caribbean in Haiti. So most of us, we, as when you're born, a lot of time you get baptized Catholic. So I was baptized Catholic as a child. And as I grew up, and when I was 13 years old, I converted and was baptized in the LDS church, which is the Mormon church, Mormon faith. And I was there for many, many years. I even served a mission. So I probably wasn't one of those people knocking at your door wanting to talk about Jesus and the Bible. So I even did that. And then, but towards my whole entire life since I was little, I had some very interesting spiritual connections with the unseen, with spirit world. And often when it comes to religion and this type of aspect of spirit, it is often seen as taboo or as being bad, as being evil. And as a kid, I didn't understand. I could see things, right, that other people didn't understand, or I knew things before they come. I knew things from the past. Nobody had to tell me anything. And it was very a big conflict for me. It was a strong conflict, especially when I was part of the LDS church. It was a very strong conflict to know what was true, what was not true, what was happening with me and my heart and the whole story. Until one day I decided I was going to stop ignoring all those gifts that was part of me, was making who I am. And it came truly in a dream when one of my ancestors shows up and asks me to take the staff. And he said, when you do it, everything else is going to start to open. Everything else is going to start to make sense. So when I took the staff in my dream, it's been an incredible journey of opening and also accepting and understanding the concept of religion, right? And understand the concept why it's important for people to have those little group, and also understand the roots of faith, the roots of what's the reason we're so important for us to commune together, to connect with the unseen, to connect with God, or whomever you like to call it. I like to call it like the universe, and I like to call it spirit, my ancestors. So how those things are important, and how as I became to trust myself a little bit more, trust my ancestors a little bit more, read a little bit more, connect a little bit more with my roots. I found the peace that I was looking for. So, and as I find peace with myself, all my other shamanic gifts start to open up. And that's it's been really my journey from being little Catholic girl to the LDS member and an LDS missionary, and now I'm fully, truly who I was supposed to be and who I am from the beginning, which is a shaman.
That is quite the journey, especially
It is.
because like that's such like to go from so strict to being on the other side. But it's great because you have the insight on the
Yes.
different paths of that journey.
Mhm.
Something I've always found interesting about faith and something that I personally have had to always sort of like reconcile with my faith because I grew up very traditional and I still have a strong sense of faith more so than like my relationship with religion, if you will. Because what I've always wrestled with is I feel like there's a level of taking away that individual thought from you when you are deeply in the religion aspect of it, where you're being like told, like, this is what you have to think and this is what you have to feel. And like you lose that sort of individuality. And I feel like I've always kind of like fought for that. And so
Mhm.
it's been harder for me to like stick to certain religious practices versus, as you mentioned, like trusting your own faith and finding your own path. Now, thankfully, there are some churches that are like, you know, find and listen to your own voice, and it's nice when you can find that. But did you find, I guess, for me in my journey, I felt guilt in the beginning,
Mhm.
guilt that I was questioning certain things that were being told to me that I was like, this just doesn't quite feel right. Did you have some of that in your journey
Oh,
as you transitioned?
sister, a lot of it, like a lot. Let's just say that. But because it is okay, let's make it clarity within faith. the word faith and the word religion, right? Faith, it's very important to understand, it's that connections, that belief of something higher than us, that need that we have, because we are more than just that body, right? And we're more than our mind. We also have that part of us that makes us our spirit, or some people call it our soul, which is our whole self. That part of us, it's really, that is part of our faith. Like, what is it that your core sense of who you are connect to, believe to? And it's kind of a knowing, right? It's just that core knowing, and you don't know why you know it, but you just know it deep down inside of you. So I like to help people understand that's faith. Religion, it's in organizations, right? It's an organized group, meant to for community, to for the same type of, to help us grow within that. If we have similar belief systems, that's what was created in the beginning, right? To help people grow in a community setting. So, and as different religions grow, different leaders from those religions grow, different ideology are implemented. And because of those ideology that's implemented, sometimes they can differ from what our core is telling us, right? I remember for myself, a lot of time when I was learning about some of the religious books, and because I was Catholic and from the Mormon church, I had the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, and the Mormon, we have also like the Book of Mormon. So I have all those different religious books in me that I was reading or trying to understand. But sometimes when a leader was speaking, it was differing from what my core was telling me. This doesn't seem quite right. But if you've been there from the beginning, you were taught in organizations to don't question much. And I think that's what kills us. That's what kills spirit. And when you stop questioning, there's power in questions. We all know that. And it's interesting because even in the Bible, they said, ask and you're going to receive. But often when we ask and we receive a different answer from what we were taught, we feel guilty about it. Then we think that we're in the wrong. Then we think that, oh my gosh, it must be the devil speaking to me because I'm confused right now. It's bringing confusion. Also because often we are taught to be separate from our intuitions, our intuitive self. And that's when the conflicts start to happen. And that's when the guilt start to happen, especially if you were raised within it. And it is so different. People who have the courage to separate themselves, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to say, oh, I'm going to separate from it and follow my intuitive self, follow the guidance of what my heart is actually truly telling me that is true, in fact. Some people can still stay in the organizations and follow through with their intuitive self because they're comfortable, right? We all want that fellowship, right? There's something to do about fellowshipping, the singing, the music, the community, going for dinner, the big food, like the big gatherings together. It is this power in fellowshipping. So finding that balance, if you can stay in that organizations and still follow your intuitions, takes also a lot of courage. But there's nothing more powerful than your intuitions. There's nothing more powerful than what your heart is telling you. Because your core value, your core doesn't lie to you. When you're in conflict in that guilt, it's because at some point there's a lie that is in conflict with who you truly are.
Yeah. And it's interesting because for me, when you talk about that conflict and your intuition, obviously the show is about
Yeah.
allyship with the LGBTQ community, and I have to say that my relationship with people within that community played a large part in that whole my thinking about my faith and like trusting, because I was a theater kid in high school. Like, I did musicals, I was in the orchestra, did all that, and as stereotypical, that includes usually quite often a lot of people in the LGBTQIA community. So for me, it was so hard to reconcile like these awesome people who are like kind and loving and fun and great with like the teachings of like, oh, they're going to hell because of who they love. I'm like, there are all these people who are doing these terrible things, and there's words being put out about this community for no other reason than who they love. And it didn't reconcile within my spirit that that was a path that it wasn't something that I could fully swallow and that I could fully be like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. It helped me as I got older and found that there were churches that were more open to it and like that were more accepting. But it definitely played a huge role in my journey to where I am in my faith now and with religion, because it just has never quite sat right with me that someone would be judged so harshly for who they're loved if we're also taught that like God makes no mistakes and we are born the way we're born, right? Did
Of course.
your faith or did your relationship with people within that community play any role in your journey towards where you are in your faith now?
Oh, definitely. Like in my high school, we had like over 65 different ethnicity. I studied in Montreal. And then only that I'm in Montreal. We have a big, strong gay community in Montreal. So, and then I was in the fashion industry. So a lot of I'm close to 50. So a lot of back in my day in high school, there was quite a few friends that were already from the LGBTQIA community, but they couldn't be as open, but they were my close friend, and I loved them. Everything has to be a little bit in a hush hush, or they were unsure how to fully express themselves. But I knew them, I knew who they were. So somehow I decided at that moment, I remember very clearly, deciding to choose what, um, from Jesus' point of view, just to love people, just to love people, right? Just to love the person who I am. And I was far beyond the one who's going to be judged. And it didn't make sense. When something doesn't make sense, it just doesn't make sense that God would be like that, right? And sometimes that's the problem. To trust again, if something doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense. And when we talk about religion, we have to be careful because there's other religious practice that are open, have always been open to people from the LGBTQIA, right? Often the restrictions often happen when within the Christianity sections, part of this Christianity section that are very limited, but there's a lot of open religion that doesn't really affect the people if they are gay or not, or part of any member of the LGBTQI, it doesn't matter. So when we start to actually observe the history of whatever religion that you're part, I love to tell people that study your religion, find out how did it start, understand the organizations, and often you will see, even in the Bible, people, there's a lot of story about, there's a lot of story about homosexuality in there, and people doesn't want to actually look at it, but you know, Solomon and David, there's some good stories about them, right? So take your time to read it. And often also when we read the books, when we understand the history of the books, same as the Bible just means biblios, which means many books. So it's a collection of many books. And in every book, even Christ even said it, he said it, don't get stuck up with the letter of the word. Just not stuck up with that. Also it of it. And then if you connect with, you don't cannot hate and want harm to your other fellow being. There's no hate or harm to be done to them, right? And then that's what sometimes we forget about that. When people start to bring hate, it's because they have not understand the core value of their religion. Because most religion did not start with hate and the desire to seclude and to separate. It was always, the beginning always was a way to include, to fellowship, to bring together. And often we forget that. Go to your roots. Understand what exactly that you're choosing to follow. And when you do that, you're also going to realize that your brothers and sisters who have decided to love differently than you, that's all it is. They just decide to love differently than you. It's that simple.
It's always interesting for me because I feel sometimes like Christianity is like two different waves. Like there's the Christianities who follow Jesus Christ, right? We're like love, accepting all those things. And then I feel like there's like the Old Testament Christianity, like Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife, like very judgmental. And sometimes I wish that people who would sort of preach that version of the Bible, I want to be like, don't forget there's a New Testament. Don't forget there's like teachings about understanding and acceptance. And like I don't understand why you're stopping at this like other stuff because it's all growth, right? And if it's all part of the same Bible, why are we choosing to ignore the parts about loving others and accepting others? And it becomes this point of frustration for me sometimes. Something I want to ask you though is because you've had sort of that journey from your stricter religion to now where you are. I'm guessing you didn't just cut off everyone you talked to before. You weren't like, oh, I'm open. I'm shaman now, and now I'm not talking to you. So I would imagine sometimes you're still in those environments around people who have more of those traditional values, and maybe sometimes you still engage in those conversations. Like, how do you navigate those conversations with people who have those more traditional values about the community versus, compared to where you are now?
You know, the interesting things about this is that when you leave, you have more compassion for everybody else than those who, when my friends who saw me leave, are more in panic and more judgmental than me that left, which is compassion. I have no problem going back to the church and sit down for a nice preaching, and I'll be like, oh, that's really good. And I'm sitting with them, and if they have a special event, I will go. You know, it's Christmas here. A lot of church have the great Christmas carol and go. I will go with my friends, and because I love it and I'll enjoy it without being affected by it. Those conversations can be very simple because if we go to the debate, what I find out, debate doesn't bring to anybody anything, right? What I like to say to people is that how much do you know somebody from that community? Because when they're when they're presented as other, the othering, it's easy to separate, right? You are the other. You are not the same as me. You are basically close to being not the same human. And it can become the othering, can it also be a form of dehumanizations? And then when you start to remove the humanity of a group, then it's easier to like disrespect them, talk bad about them, reject them, all of the above, hate, and all those things, right? So often I'm like, how much do you know about the other that you're speaking of? And when they say, well, I don't know, do you have any interest and desire to want to know? Right? Because I have some great friends that I can introduce you from any part. I know everybody, anybody from the LGBTQI, I know one person personally, and I can introduce you and have a conversation. And often that's what it is. People start to change their mind when they start to actually connect in the human side of it. That's often what it is. And and they start to get a little bit of conflict. Yes, but, I know you're a great person, but it's okay. It's a beginning. And at the end of the day, I said, at the end, when we all die, we're all going to have some great surprises. Like, you're going to have some serious surprise when you wake up in the other side, right? So really, it's to remove that. I always try to remove that other aspect. And when they have honest questions, and I always listen, and I said, that's a great question. How how do you know that? And I flipped it. Often people, if we flipped it the other side, use the same, we're talking about Christianity now, let's use the same way that Jesus spoke, right? He always flipped the coin, right? Who of you without sin cast the first stone? He flipped it. Who of you, okay, are you your brother's keeper? He always flipped the coin. Because often when we don't take the time to flip the coin, that's when it's easier again to hurt somebody. But if we flip it, how would I feel if somebody does that to me? How would I feel if somebody set you aside because of this, of that? What about I decide to not speak to you because you're Christian? Or because I say that you're evil because you're Christian? I don't know you, but I'm going to tell you, oh my gosh, let me take you out of my sight. How would you feel? So it's the same. Flipping the coin also helps somebody um, pay more attention in their actions and also in their verbiage, because we don't take the time to do that. And often in religious setting, they don't take the time they don't encourage that as often that they should.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I love that you mentioned the othering of people that allows you to dehumanize them. Because I think that people do that so often. And it's always been something that has been both curious and very frustrating for me is people's ability to put people in these lump sums that allow them to perpetuate their hate onto them instead of realizing that there are individuals, right? And so something I always think about, whether it's with the LGBTQIA community or with just being Black, like, and part of why I'm such a strong supporter of LGBTQIA rights is because for me it's the same as like race rights, right? Like
Girl.
people like to stereotype us and put us all in these bubbles. And what's always been wild to me is how people have no problem saying like, oh, all gay people this or all Black people that. But no one, not no one, but most people won't do that for Christianity, right? Like if you were to go, like you just mentioned, to someone and say like, well, I can't get behind Christianity because this church has done this awful thing, so all Christianity is bad. They'd be like, no, it's just that church or just those people. And it's amazing to me how in certain circumstances people can see the individuality of it and separate the bad actions of certain people and certain things and still say this as a whole is okay, but they are incapable of doing that for like Black people or gay people. Like they'll pull out those exceptions, those one-offs, and say like that applies to the entire group. And that has always been so incredibly frustrating to me, you know, especially when you talk about negative things and like harm that's been done. Well, there's been so much harm. Look at the number of people who harm women. 60% of women who are murdered in this country is by a spouse or someone in their family, but no one's saying like don't get married because there's only a 40, you know what I mean? Like nobody pulls that negative out and says you should live out of that fear. But the minute
Mhm.
it comes to something they don't want to accept, suddenly it's lead by the fear, not lead by the hope and the chances. And that's always been very, like I mentioned, frustrating to me. How do you sort of navigate those feelings? I imagine you feel that frustration sometimes too, or I've dealt with people who are like that. Like how do you navigate that?
You know, the interesting about those high emotions and how to go about it is, I think for myself, the first thing I ask myself, I go within. I go within myself first. What is it that I truly believe? What is it that I truly stand for? And what do I truly know? Okay. And then the other person, sometimes it's good to put yourself a little bit in their shoes for a few minutes to understand their perspective. And some people you cannot understand their perspective. Like for me, like, Nazi or anybody like that, I don't understand her. I cannot, it's hard for me to put myself in their shoes because I will not understand their perspective, right? Why they do what they do. That I won't understand. But one thing for sure, my frustrations when I get bubble up, because sometimes I do get bubble up because we all put in the same bubble, is again to bring them to their own individuality. When people generalize, I bring them to themselves. The same way I bring to my perspective for myself, I bring to myself. Let's just say, Oh, all Black people in a certain way are lazy. Well, it's pretty, where I don't know where that statement is coming from, right? Because they were slave and they built a damn country. I don't know, right? It's kind of, I don't know where the laziness is coming from, right?
Right.
And often people, right? Often people start to, it's easier to stick with the group. A lot of people stick to the group because it's easier and it's safer. It's hard to decide to step outside of a box, to step outside of the group think, right? I've seen quite a few people one on one, they speak differently or they act differently than when they're in the group. And I think it's the same thing with religious belief, right? When they are at church, it's a different perspective because they don't want to be, when you know you've been othering people, you don't want people to other you. So what do? You stick with the group, right? Because are you willing, are you ready to be put aside? And that's hard. But there's so much reward upon it, right? You felt it, I felt it. You feel more comfortable, at peace. You know you're standing up for something. You're more truthful with yourself. There's nothing more better than to be honest and truthful to oneself. Because when you become start to lie to what you truly know to be true, you start to be confused about your own self and your own identity. So often, I always bring it to the person, bring it back to them. Because if you start to go to, I had that debate of, let me find you some proof. Girl, as a missionary, I read the Bible cover to cover, the verse and everything like that. We can have some verses like debate if you want to. I'll have it, right? And I've read the Torah and I've read the Bhagavad, which is the Indians' books. I've read so many books. I've read so many religious books. Let's have a debate if you want to. And I realized debate in religious book doesn't mean it's doesn't mean thing because it's always going because it was translated so many different ways, so many interpretations. We won't get into anything. But when I flip the coin and go back to the individual, when I bring them home within the family setting, that's when people start to actually get more intercept, go in within themselves and truly realize, oh, am I doing what right for real? Or am I just following just to follow? And some people's their core values too. And when it's that case, so it's okay to say okay. It's okay if that's what you believe, right? But don't come after me and be mad at me, right? I'm going to respect your choice. We need to respect that. Mine as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's a huge point. Is just coming back to respecting each other and the difference of opinions and thoughts. And as you mentioned, that the individualism is so important because you will often find that people's thoughts when you're alone with them versus the thoughts when they're with a group is very different. And it is very hard for people to stand up and say, "Well, I think differently. I feel differently." I think that's why it's important when you do have the ability to do it to speak up. I know it's always been hard for me, but then I also look around and see all the people who don't at all. So I use my voice when I can, if not for any other reason, to help other people feel like it's okay to use their voice as well. Because sometimes people are just waiting for one other person to show them that it's okay for them to use their voice. And sometimes you have to be that person, especially when dealing with or trying to help marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm.
Something that you speak of that I found really interesting was the sacred art of holding space when it comes to
Mm.
allyship. Can you just talk a little bit more about like what that means and how you do that?
Holding space. Well, first of all, to be honest, in my practice, when I have some members of the LGBTQ come to me, it is very hard to find that balance because there's a lot of fear and guilt what's going to happen when they move the other side, right? What's going to happen with my spirit in that conflict? Because for so much, they've been told, this is who you are, this is where you're supposed to be, this is all bad or evil. So a lot, I've been suppressing it for so many, many, many years. I have people who are married just because it was a way to hide what they truly were. And then when they finally came out, then it was like a crazy catastrophe with their families and everything else, right? So it make it even worse. But to find that balance, I think holding space in your practice is just for in my practice is just for me to sit with them and to help them understand that their soul identity, what's made them truly who they are, the universe, God, the energy around us, the vibrations on us, do not see the difference because it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect their evolutions. It doesn't affect your soul evolutions, right? It's probably part actually of your evolution. When I go to different setting of different group, it's having the courage when I see one of my brothers or sisters being discriminated to help them know that they're not alone in that setting. And that takes courage. I think that's a better way to hold space is just sitting with them and say, you're not alone. So that little space that you think that you're standing alone, you're not. Because guess what? I'm here with you. And it could be if you have a hard time speaking with your voice, you're not vocal, just stand beside somebody, hold a hand, hold a shoulder. If that's all you can do, do it. Sometimes it's just to say, giving a smile and say, I'm with you. Because not everybody can speak up, but not those people as vocal as I am or as vocal that you are, right? But take the time to know to the other person. Sorry. Hello?
Okay, yes, you went away
Can
for
you
a
hear
second.
me?
You're back.
Yes? Okay. So let them know that they're not alone. You are not alone, my friend. And also, when you go to any space that you have the chance to go to, is to have the courage to sit within yourself and to know that the for me space is a lot to do with the energy. The space that you're holding right now is full of powerful energy, of powerful vibrations. So when you have the courage to bring that with you with the other people, you can change the way others are seeing one group. We don't realize the power that our just our presence and our energy, our vibration can do in a setting. So not only with the sound of our voice, because our voice are spells, that's one of my beliefs. So when you speak, and if you speak with the intention, if you speak with spirit, you have the chance to open the heart for many others. So that's how, for me, I see, and that's how I hold more space for people.
And I think that's great, just giving people that sense of
Ooh, I cannot hear
comfort to
you.
be who they are. Oh, can you hear me now?
Not sure why I
Are
cannot
you?
hear you.
Hmm, my mute is off. I can hear you okay.
Mm-mm, I can't.
Pierce, can you let me know if you're able to hear me? Mm, all right, can you hear me now? Is it better now?
Mm-mm, it's kind of not at all.
Not at
But you can
all.
hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Well, hopefully this will adjust itself, and hopefully you, the audience, can hear me. Let's go. Excuse me. I was going to say that it's great the importance of being able to sort of hold that space for people and let people feel like they are comfortable where they're at and that they have the ability to use their voice in a space that feels safe for them. I had one more question, but if we can't hear,
Not
that's
sure
not
why I cannot hear you. Oh, that's so fresh.
working. All right, I went to mute and I'm back.
Let's see. No, it's all good in my hand.
It's
Hmm.
all you can see. Okay. Um, Well, we are coming to the end. I wanted to ask an additional question, but we're close to the end anyway, so I guess we'll wrap it up if the guests can't hear me. I'm sorry. Sorry you can't hear me. Um, what I was going to just say is just to reiterate the importance of accepting others for who they are, where they are in their journey, whether they're in a space of accepting their sexuality, their gender, whether they're not, whether they want to talk about it or not. It's not really anyone's business. But if someone does, feel comfortable to bring that to you, try to let them know that you're a safe space for them. It can be hard sometimes to reconcile your faith, especially if you grew up more traditional, with what seems like the times these days. But remember, within the Bible, as she mentioned, there are Bible stories um, that lend to it being okay, and more and most important, that talk about the importance of just loving people, right? Lead with love and go from there. Thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. I'm sad that Coach Val can't hear us, so we can end this. But again, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Leave comments. If you ever want to be a guest in the show, let us know. And if you want to know more about the organization, you can visit iammecorp.org to learn more about the great things that they do. And next Saturday, or this Saturday coming up, is the holiday gala. You can go on the website to learn more about that and to get your tickets. And we hope to see some of you there. Thank you so much to those who have joined us. And thank you also, Coach Val, even though I know you can't hear us, but thank you. I wish I knew sign language. Thank you.
Allies Amplified is a live series by IME Inc. that highlights powerful stories of LGBTQIA plus allies.
Not only are they sharing their stories, but also